EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.
Hello and welcome back to EDClass's podcast. Today we are joined by safeguarding expert consultant Millie Wildish. Millie has a vast amount of experience in safeguarding and has worked for the Metropolitan Police as a child protection specialist, counter-terrorism officer, and has led a multi-agency safeguarding hub. Millie is also a specialist arbitrator and national safeguarding panel member for sports resolution and has completed investigations and training for sport organisations, care homes and charities. So today we're going to be discussing the importance of safeguarding across the education sector and the benefits of continuous professional development on this topic. So Millie, thanks for joining us. First off, tell us a bit about yourself and your experience.
Yep, sure. Thank you for having me. So my name's Millie Wildish, and once upon a time I was a police officer. And I was the service lead in Newham in East London for something called the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. So for those of you who are not actually aware of exactly what that is, when organisations that interact with adults who might have a vulnerability and children, if you have a concern about any individual, then you can approach your local authority multi-agency safeguarding hub. So within London, obviously every borough has their own, and around the country every county will have their own. Some counties are split, so you might have north or south, east or west, and you will refer in via the website or giving them a call, and you will tell them what you're concerned about, who you are concerned about, and the multi-agency safeguarding hub is a brilliant place made up of specialised police officers, children's social care, adult social care. The LADO is very involved as well. There is health and education, and everyone sits together in one big area, and they are able to look up information about a particular family or a particular child. You can see when someone presented at A&E, you can see how they've been getting on at school and what their attendance is like. You can see if they've visited their GP, whether police officers have attended the address and the reasons why, and mental health, the background of everybody. And everyone can sit together and have lots of conversations about actually what is the risk to this person, and review the concern that has been made, and to see whether actually action needs to be taken, and what does that action look like, and who needs to be involved. And obviously the police are involved in, does there need to be a police investigation? Is there a crime element to this? And it has really improved the way that professionals share information with each other. It improves the speed. This is obviously done almost instantaneously, and it means that strategy discussions about a child, a family, an adult, so this is mainly done around children, this is where you get your most referrals, can be done on that day, and action can be taken almost immediately, and social workers will be allocated in a really efficient way. And this is probably the hard work of lots of serious case reviews that have happened, that stemming back years and years of where we didn't have such good communication with our safeguarding partners, and where things didn't go quite right. And so that was my role, and then I am very heavily, and have been historically for the last 20 plus years, in safeguarding. I'm a child protection specialist trained officer when I was in the police, and that led to me being the service lead, so managing all those referrals into the Newham MASH. So I left the police in about 2017, the tail end, and I became a safeguarding consultant. And I do lots of safeguarding investigations. I support local authorities. I work with sporting organisations on a really frequent basis. I review cases that happen, concerns that are raised. So I still engage with all those professionals on a day-to-day basis, and still heavily involved in safeguarding adults and children. And also on the side of that, I also am a family mediator, and I work with families about sorting out how to separate in an effective way, which I see as just an extension of what I already do. So I'm still on a day-to-day basis, still out there safeguarding. is a very long-winded way of talking about what I do.
No, I mean, yeah, you see, you've got a vast amount of experience, to be honest with you, haven't you? And then the work you've done as well, what we've seen here at EDClass, it's tremendous to see what you've been able to implement across in terms of safeguarding. So all credit to you. Just touching back about your experience in terms of the multi-agency safeguarding hubs. How important are those becoming now in terms of supporting the child with their safeguarding? And as you say, being a mediator as well, how important is that aspect to be able to overcome some barriers they might be experiencing?
So the MASH are crucial. They are your front door. So if you imagine that social services is a house, and you need to access social services, you are knocking on their front door, and that is who you're going to meet is the MASH team. After that, it will go to different social services departments. And it depends on what's going to happen next, what professionals that family or that child will interact with. But the MASH is the hub, and that's why it's called the hub, is the hub of social services. I am regularly involved with the MASH, and that's because I help organisations who are managing allegations, usually against people in a position of trust, and so there is that's where that goes, and then the LADO's involved in that. In relation to mediation, again, that I am heavily involved with the MASH because sometimes professionals such as GPs, mental health services, and other maybe charities will refer families into the MASH because that family's issues doesn't quite sit anywhere which we could say, oh, well, that should sit there, or that should sit with that professional, or we can't identify a professional which can help that individual. And mediation is quite an unfamiliar territory for a lot of people. People do not understand what family mediation actually means. So I've done a lot of work, particularly with my local authority down in Southend, and I know a lot of mediators across the country work alongside the MASH, where they, with consent, can refer families into us, where actually the problem is the conflict that's going on because of a separation of that family, and they need support in understanding how they are going to work in this new co-parenting way, which feels completely unfamiliar and really quite scary to try and work out the practicalities of their finances, of where they're going to live, how are they going to manage, and actually what do the childcare arrangements when there's lots of stress and tension within that family. And that is not actually a social services something that they can necessarily have the time or resources to deal with or to manage alone. It could be that there's other issues that social services can support with, and this is where I come in. They refer these families into me. I'm based right near social services, and I support the families because family mediation is partly funded by the government. There's a voucher scheme, so I can provide services to a family without it costing them any money, which is the biggest, I think, barrier to mediation is, and to any kind of support really, the way you have to pay for it is, well, if you haven't got the finances for that, how can you possibly access, for example, a family solicitor? There's very little legal aid now for family matters, unfortunately. So, it's where do you go to go and get support that isn't going to involve me having to put myself into debt?
No, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot involved in this safeguarding aspect, isn't there, really? And you do a lot of work across the sector. In terms of the challenges that are involved, then, what would you say from your experience has been the biggest safeguarding concerns and challenges throughout the education system at the moment? What do you think that is, and how can we overcome those barriers?
So right now, your biggest issue is children who are missing from education. So that could be for all sorts of reasons. There are children who were technically taught at home, homeschooled during COVID, and there was no one able to physically go and check on these children. And a lot of these children have not returned back into education. There are children who disappear from a school and they don't reappear in another school, and so they are missing from education. You have children who are just on roll at school but missing out on huge amounts of their education, where they turn up sporadically. We don't know where these children are going, where they have gone. Are these children in some sort of danger? What is happening at home? Why are they non-attendance? And that could be due to mental health issues, family separation. This is why I do a lot with families that are separating, because the trauma to a child, we know from families who separate, if it's not dealt with in the right way, where they are experiencing that in a very negative way, can impact on that child's ability to engage with education. So, we know that we are having a mental health crisis. Keeping children safe in education talks so much now about it is the responsibility of organisations who educate children to identify those who are suffering from poor mental well-being. And it specifically also states that we should be completely aware that poor mental well-being in a child could potentially be an indication that they are suffering some sort of abuse. And so that is why it's so important that we are completely aware of our children who are missing from education or significantly have a reduced attendance percentage. Why is that? What is causing that? Which is a big thing to try and deal with when you are a school and you've only got so many teachers and so many members of staff. Can you actually spare somebody to go and knock on these children's homes, the doors, and find out, are they there? And if so, why are they not at school? Why has no one called in to say that they are sick? Why are they not there for such a long periods of time? Why are they missing from education? And I've worked in the school. It's a really tricky business to off-roll a child from education. There's a lot of steps to it. There's a lot of safeguarding implications for off-rolling a child. You have to be sure that they are no longer going to attend that school. And actually, then it's on the local authority to try and find out, well, if they're not attending a school in our borough or our county, where are they attending education? Is this family actually needed to be reported missing? All of these things have to be carefully thought about, because we know about ghost children. This is what they're termed, ghost children who are on roll at a school, but no one's ever set eyes on this child. That's not right, and there is significant safeguarding concerns linked to that. But where are the funding and resources to able to put into individuals who are able to go and find these children? Yeah. And it's not just one problem. It's the problem of multiple professionals.
Yeah, as I said, I think there's a lot of lack of resources lately, and the persistent absence rate, the over absence rate is still quite high, especially from the pandemic as well. And then, as he's touching on as well, having to deal with trauma and adverse childhood experiences can be difficult to navigate, especially for professionals having to deal with a lot of students in their cohort as well. So it's just being able to how do we find the best route for them? How do we find the best solution to accommodate their needs? Essentially, from your experience, then, what would you say is needed to create that safe, calm, orderly, and ultimately positive environment where children are going to want to attend in the first place, and then ultimately be able to say that they're secure and safe in that environment too?
So trauma-informed practice is something which is referenced quite a lot, especially when we talk about children who have experienced adverse childhood experiences, whether that be something that's happened within the family dynamic or it's something that's happened to the child, such as some sort of abuse, or that they've been taken into care. We need to identify children who have experienced trauma, and we need to be able to say to ourselves and to acknowledge that these are not broken children. These are not broken toys that need to be just discarded into an alternative provision or into an isolation space, and that's where they will remain until we think their behaviour is good enough. We need to help those children overcome their trauma. If we don't, then that will be something that lives with them for the rest of their life and will dictate the choices that they make in life. Usually choices which will be poor choices linked to addiction, risk-taking behaviours, and being involved with people who are dangerous, who are not good for them, to be in relationships where there's domestic abuse and violence. And this is why we see cycles, family cycles, children who grow up in family situations where there is poor parental capacity, there is poor choices being made in that family. There are lots and lots of trauma generated within that family, and we know that parents who experience trauma, there is trauma usually for that child in the way that they are brought up, and it's not that parent's fault that they have poor parental capacity. It's probably because they themselves have grown up in an environment where there is poor parental capacity. And so you have poor parents being brought up by poor parents, and then their children are brought up by poor parents, and there has to be some intervention at some point. And this is where education take a big role in that, because they are seeing these children for the most of their lives. How many hours do these children are they in school? If they're in school, you are seeing them all day and hopefully every day. And when they start to disengage, that is the point you should identify, why is this child disengaging? And if they are in disengaging because they have experienced trauma, then the only way to deal with that is to manage that child in a trauma-informed way, to view that child in a trauma-informed way, that their behaviour is a direct result of their experiences. And they are not naughty, they are not disruptive, they are distressed. And it's only with that lens that we are able then to effectively have a better relationship with that child, because then we are beginning to understand them. Children who act out, is one phrase, who become dysregulated, it's not their choice, it's because they don't know what else to do, because their body is panicking. And it's only when we slowly start to gently begin to navigate all those thoughts and feelings with that child and bring in other professionals who are experts in trauma-informed practice, will we make any headway with that child. If we continue to isolate them for bad behaviour, to sanction them, to fine their parents for not turning up, or to suspend them, to expel them, you will continue the cycle and nothing will ever get better.
No, 100%. I think, what we need to do is find that root cause, don't we, of why they're 100%. What you're saying is why they're off, why they're behaving in certain ways. And I had a great conversation with lads like us, and they talked about having this professional curiosity, asking the right questions for this child, and then having that collaborative approach, having loads of professionals around to integrate the best solution. I mean, we've seen a lot of our teachers are now becoming trauma informed, professionally trained as well, and we've seen the importance of it, because we've seen that there's so many children now, especially who have that trauma, and it's just become a massive problem. So, but again, what I was just alluding to what you were talking about earlier about how they're still at home. How can we safeguard the children at home? Then there's obviously there can be quite a lot of barriers. I mean, there in having an indication what home life can be, there could be a lot of terms of abuse and that aspect. So how can we ensure that they're safe as well when they're actually learning from home, if they are?
Well, this is a massive part of the challenge. How do we know a child who is homeschooled is safe? And there are certain things that the local authority have to do, but essentially the local authority do not have the time or the people to go and monitor on a regular basis every child who is homeschooled. And unless the law changes around that, then there is only so many things that can be done. You're relying on professionals such as health and other professionals who may integrate with the family at certain points if, say, a child was injured or ill, to hopefully pick up on any signs that the child is not, that there are signs that this child potentially could be suffering some sort of harm. But I think homeschooled children, I think in general, I think there's quite a negative view that if a child is homeschooled, that actually that's not a healthy thing. But for some children, actually, it is the best thing for them, because they can't cope within a mainstream schooling environment, and an alternative provision is just not going to meet their needs. So there are children that just don't fit into a slot, and the education system just doesn't provide something that's going to fit their needs, their mold. And that is what it is. And I applaud those parents for being able to make that tough decision, probably at the detriment of their employability and their job success, to sit and homeschool their children. That is not the main issue. These are children who are on roll at school, where we aren't aware that they are being homeschooled. It may be that a parent has said at one point, well, I'm teaching them at home, but actually that all has to be done officially. These are children who are just not attending. These are non-attending children missing from education. It's not necessarily a homeschooling issue. And so these are the children that we need to be aware of and being able to find and to integrate them back into education by identifying why are they not attending. And contextual safeguarding also is something that we need to consider for these children who are non-attending. So actually, although the problem might be at home, it might not be. This might be something because they are engaged with gangs, or the victims of child sexual exploitation, and actually it's their peers in the community which are a risk to them. We do hope that actually, parents will identify that and report that, and that there will be multi-agency working with those children, but not always. So there are children who are neglected, and so of course they're experiencing some sort of abuse, or there's domestic violence at home, and so they're spending more time out into the communities. But actually that is where the risk is to them more significantly. That's sort of the sexual abuse, not that the neglect isn't really important, but that's the cause of why they are out in the community. So they are the term is polyvictimization. It's two people abusing them at the same time, and that is the reason why they are not engaged in education, because they are spending more time with an unsafe individual. But that's not being reported because the parents are neglecting the child, so they don't feel it's necessary to report that in. There are so many nuances to why a child is not engaging with education. Each child, it will be very different. Yeah, there might be similar factors. There might be neglect, there might be domestic abuse, there might be child sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation involved. But each child, there will be their own story, their own trauma, their own experiences. So we have to take each child in as we see them, and what we find out about them. And this is why trauma-informed practice is so important.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, everyone's got their own individual case, haven't they? And then I think that's why it's so important to have eyes on, even if they are learning from home. That's what we try and preach here, just to ensure that their environment is safe and conducive for that learning environment. But then, as you alluded to, yeah, the county line aspects of how dangerous that can be as well. So it's just how do we find that solution to accommodate their needs, but also engage them as well. And we've seen a lot of edtech, online learning. It can be that other layer of support and that transformative period that could be the opportunity for them to engage back into learning. In terms of, I'll just go all the way back to about your experience as well, just quickly. The sporting aspect. When taking a look at extracurricular activity, sport clubs, how obviously we've seen a lot of major case studies as well, high profile ones. How important is a safeguarding element there to ensure that whenever they're doing extracurricular activities, that they need to be safe and secure in that environment as well? What would you suggest needs to be implemented in education, and maybe even more senior elite level as well?
So sporting places are fantastic, because we know that children that engage in sport and any extracurricular activity with their peers, it's really good for your mental health, your physical health, and your general engagement with your peers. And so they are in theory great. And but it's really important that we don't think that they are necessarily going to be safe by just thinking that it's going to be safe. And what the problem in a lot of organisations that provide extracurricular activities is that they're not well funded, or that they're run by volunteers, or you pay a very small amount to be able to attend. And you know, gym clubs, it'll be full of volunteers. Cricket clubs, you know, doing the refereeing and things like that, the weekend football, you're going to have a lot of parents and volunteers who are incredibly well-meaning individuals, and on a whole 99% will be there because they just want to see the kids having fun. And that, and you know, all this, you know, being suspicious of individuals that want to support children. There are only small numbers of individuals who want to engage with children for abusive purposes. On a whole, these volunteers will be lovely, and they will have different life experience, different professional experiences, but that doesn't mean that they are experienced in safeguarding. But where are the funds to be able to provide safeguarding training to all of these individuals? And you'll get a high turnover. You know, you might have some people turn up one week who can help support, and there might be just a parents list, but they do not have the skills or knowledge to be able to identify a child who is at risk and know what to do about that. And that is the biggest barrier to the low level recreational type sporting scenarios, which is very different to the issues that you may see in more elite performance. So in elite performance, you do have the funding. You know, the sporting agencies such as Sport UK and Sport England will fund elite sport, particularly if this is a sport that's involved in the Olympics, British Championships, World Championships, European Championships. You know, the money is there. But what we have historically seen, and things are getting better, but you know, this is always going to take time, money, effort to get there, is that a child almost becomes a commodity because they are an individual who will earn funding for a sport. And where you see that money making of this elite brilliant athlete, you then lose that this is just a child. And you know, elite athletes, they will spend less time in education because they need to do more training. They will spend increasingly long hours in the gym or wherever it is that they are training with that individual coach. That coach becomes incredibly important to that individual because that is part of the key to the success. And there you do have these risk factors around that relationship over time becoming more abusive potentially, because there is this need to succeed. And the research says, I'm not saying anything new, the research says parents will put this coach on a pedestal. They become the BN to this child's success. And so the trust and faith is put into this individual, and this becomes quite a complex, nuanced, risky area where things could become abusive, and that's not really identified. And it's not identified for quite a long period of time, usually until that athlete is retired and out of the sport, and they look back on their experiences and realise that actually that wasn't a healthy relationship that was having there. And we've seen this in so many cases. I mean, we've seen this in swimming, we've seen this in gymnastics, we've seen this in football. This is nothing new. And what the problem is, it might not be something old either, unless we keep on working with all these sports to improve the training and the understanding of the coaches, particularly around positive coaching practices, and understanding what the needs of a child are, even though they are also an elite athlete.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even if there is that funding available, we've seen even go to Olympic level that it could actually happen. There's so many high-profile cases out there. But just going back to the amateur, the school education level, they need to have that environment that's going to be safe and it's fun to start with. And when they're placing so much trust into that coach, it can be quite disheartening So, but that's what we need to ultimately do, is make an environment as well for it in terms of sporting and education environment that is going to be fun but also safe. So yeah,
It's a culture, it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
If it becomes a culture, then you're going to succeed. Essentially, that's what, if the sport has a culture of safety. I do loads of work with cricket, and I see a continuous fight to make it a culture, that it doesn't matter whether you're playing on a Saturday with your mates and it's very quite informal, right up to, you know, the elite level. It's safe, and it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're a child or an adult, you're safe. You know, safer recruitment practices, a safe environment, a culture of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah, 100%. It's having that positive and inclusive environment with high standards, all integrated throughout everyone, from the student all the way to coach level. So definitely. Just one or two more. This safeguarding, it can be quite difficult to understand because it's so complex, isn't it? I mean, where can someone gain more knowledge on safeguarding? You know, obviously, how can online courses be beneficial? Where do you think you can get some more information?
There is loads of information out there, but what I think is the challenge is that some of the information, and particularly in sort of legislation pieces, it can be quite complicated and seem almost overwhelming. And I think also training courses are great. Online training, in-person training. I'm very much of a mixed learner. You know, if you can get a mixture of both, then that's great. But I think it's putting your training into practice is the best way that you are going to actually fully understand the safeguarding processes and how they truly work. And I feel it's starting at the beginning. You know, what actually does safeguarding mean? What is abuse? What does child protection mean? And working your way up slowly and effectively, and finding stuff out for yourself. There are loads of resources online by all sorts of agencies. There's loads of YouTube videos that are available that are made by local authorities and charities that are really, you know, good reputation. So you're not looking at something that's going to give you incorrect information. And just, if you're working with children, speak to children. How do they feel about their own safety? Do they feel comfortable when they come into the organisation or into the environment? What do they think is needed to keep themselves safe? Children now receive PSHE classes, you know, your personal, social, health and education at school. They start at 5 years old and it starts really basic. What do relationships look like? What's a family? What's the different dynamics of a family? And that builds up into things like consent and drugs and all of those sorts of things. I've got an 8-year-old myself, and she tells me all the things that she gets to learn, and incorporate all those into. So when you speak to children, they will have their own views and opinions, and often that will be through them having open discussions at school. That will bring to you what sort of their expectation it is, because adults, we might have our own expectations, but actually who are more important in all of this? It's the child's voice. So ask the children what they think.
Yeah, definitely. I think from working here, it's in that keeping in line with keeping children safe education. As it says, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. So everyone in the department knows how important safeguarding is, not just going here and working, but even out in the environment, you could see something in terms of your own family or what could be happening. So it just shows that how important it truly is to know more about safeguarding, really. So help children reach their educational potential, most definitely. But yeah, Millie, you've been absolutely amazing. Is there anything that you would like to say? Where can people find more information about you and what you do as well?
Okay, so online training, Keys to Safeguarding, so www.keystosafeguarding.co.uk. You'll find all online training. So it's me speaking. There's videos on there as well. So it's more of a mixed learning rather than a click through. all sorts of adults and children, education, sport, charities, which is another big area, I know, and also for consultancy type work, my company's MAW Safeguarding. So I do lots of support work with lots of organisations where you get me in the flesh to support your organisation rather than just online services.
Brilliant, Millie. Well, yeah, we'll make sure to check all those out, and yeah, all credit to you for what you're doing.
You.
Thanks, Millie. So that was Millie Wildish. Great discussion on safeguarding there. To learn more about online alternative provision and how EDClass can help you, call 01909 568 338 or email mail@edclass.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify accounts for more upcoming webinars and podcasts.
EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.